It's time for us to check back in with Louisa in Mountain Path and see what happens next. If you've missed any of the previous readings, you can look in the description below for a playlist. Rye was remarkably adept in the hill business of starting in any given direction and arriving at a given point by way of going round a hill or over a ridge, and so led them to the cane field in a surprisingly short time. They went down the ridge by a way different from that which they had come, skirted two hillsides, and came to a thicket of maple and beech trees on the sunny slope of an old pasture. "There they be," Rye said. Louisa looked below her through the trees and saw the drama of molasses making in full action. The Lebuck cows and the Hayes cows had joined their materials and labor and were making molasses in the same fashion their ancestors of the Revolution had doubtless made it. She did not see Chris or the dogs, Zoley and Bloof, and wondered if he were at the cave alone and if it were not dangerous there. Of late, many such thoughts had tormented her. Nights when he and Lebuck went directly away after supper and Corey and the children neither questioned nor commented, she would lie awake with troubled imaginings until their steps sounded on the porch. Other times she would be reminded that Chris was wanted just as any other escaped murderer was wanted, and no matter how many times the thought came, she suffered always the same surprise and inward revolt that things should be so. She tried not to think of Samantha T's talk, but it was not always easy. It was something she could never speak of. Corey saw them first. "Hey, Lebuck, there's the school," she called. All activities except those of the blindfolded mule that furnished the power to run the molasses mill were suspended while everyone watched teacher and the children come through the weeds and cane stubble. Louisa felt immeasurably foolish bringing these people their children when she was supposed to be teaching them. And it was hot now. A fallen stove for a holiday seemed a flimsy excuse indeed when all one's pupils wore their brogans on their shoulders instead of their feet, and their mothers worked barefooted. She was thankful that Pete and Lander saw fit to run before her shouting, "The stove fell down! The stove fell down!" "Anybody hurt?" Lebuck wanted to know. "Nope," Lander told him. "It just fell, and the ashes went all over creation." "I bet it scared Teacher," Corey said. Teacher was there by that time. "No, I wasn't scared," she told them, "but I am terribly sorry. It was all my fault. I was trying to build a fire." "The young'uns had ought to have been there to have helped," Hayes Cow said, unmindful of his meals turning with no cane to feed upon. "I reckon," Corey said, carefully skimming green scum from the thick cane syrup while boiling in the vat, "the old stove must have knowed it was 'lasses making time and the young'uns had come in handy a stripping cane." "It's nice and warm now," Louisa said. "I thought we could have school this afternoon, and perhaps some of the men could come and put the stove up late this afternoon." "It'll be cold in the schoolhouse yet," Corey said. "It's a powerful cold place, the schoolhouse," Sally said. Lebuck scratched his head. "School closed for repairs. You'll draw your pay just the same, and the young'uns can help with the lasses." "Goody," said Rye. "Shet up," said her father, and fiddled with a nail in his overall suspenders. "Today's Thursday, ain't it?" Corey said that it was, because last night was prayer meeting night at the Hainted Cave Church. Lebuck looked at the fleckless blue of the sky. "It maybe might rain," he said, "'fore we get done here, and I don't know as I can spare the time out to set her up. It'll take me and Chris both." "Ye had ought to go over the river for new pipe first. The county'll pay for it," Corey said. Lebuck looked at his wife as he thought her a woman of sense. "That's the truth," he said. "I been a-wantin' to go over on business." "I'm sorry," Louisa told him, but feeling no contrition, "to be causing you so much trouble." "No trouble at all. I hope you don't mind waiting till Monday. Better make it Tuesday to start teaching again. You'll get paid." "I don't mind," she said, thinking how simple life was. One turned over a stove in a fit of anger and received 3 days' vacation, the goodwill of both parents and children, and gave a man who'd wanted an excuse to go over the river to peddle moonshine, no doubt, the needed excuse. When the children had had their fill of hot molasses lollipops made by holding a piece of green cane in the boiling syrup until it was well coated with the sticky juice, Lee Buck commanded them to get to work and earn their salt. Much to the disgust of Lander and Pete, Rye was given the important job of keeping the mule in motion. Lee Buck explained to Louisa that Rye was a natural-born mule driver, while Pete was better at the cane stripping. Corey suggested that the children and Sally have a stripping contest. Teacher wanted to be in it too, but because of her inexperience, it was agreed to give her the 2 young boys against Mabel and Sally. All hands fell to jerking off the long blue-green blades with such speed that Lee Buck said he wished the stove had fallen on Monday. It was never known which side won. When Sally's pile of stripped cane grew larger than Teacher's, Lee Buck would quit his job of supervising and wood gathering and give Teacher a hand, and when her pile became too large, Rye would leave the mule and come to help Mabel and Sally. The children laughed and talked, begging their fathers for a real cane stripping at night to which all the people in the lower valley would be invited. The women called to each other, throwing their voices in a lower note than the shrill sounds of the children and talking of many things: quilt blocks, a new fine calf at Hayes's, and the coming revival at Hainted Cave. The babies seemed not to mind the harness of plow lines with which Sally had secured them safely to a hickory sapling, but played with the shiny cane leaves or solemnly tried the taste and feel of all the things that lay within range of their tether. Lander's pet pig had come along and was faring on skimmings in kingly fashion when not otherwise busied in rooting among the cool, slippery cane stalks. Lee Buck's hound dogs wandered about the place, licking the babies' faces at intervals, getting between the children's legs, or trying to bed themselves in the cane. The strippers worked with such speed that soon a great pile of stalks lay ready for grinding, and Lee Buck said that they might rest until Chris came with another load from Hayes's field. Louisa was angry with herself because the thought that Chris would be with them gave her so much pleasure. Lander and Pete and Quiet grew restless for something to do, so they, with occasional sallies from the hound dogs, ran around and around the Molasses mule, swinging in circles broader than the fixed path of the mule, trying to go 4 times to the mule's once, and succeeding until Rye declared they were making both her and the mule drunk and must stop. Chris came then with a wagon load of cane, and everybody helped with the unloading. When that was finished, Rye gave her mule to Lee Buck and said that she would go with the others and help in the loading. Everybody said that Teacher must go too, just for the ride, and Teacher climbed into the heavy jolt wagon and sat on its bouncing floor and watched the sky and leaves march past. The Teacher tried to get the prettiest leaves for Teacher and would leap high from the swaying wagon bed, clutching and laughing as the wagon rattled past. With so many hands in the helping, the cane was quickly loaded. The children, mindful of the hazelnuts that grew above the Hayes Cow Spring, said they would walk back to the molasses field, but that there would be room for Teacher with Chris on the wagon. So Chris pulled her up the slippery wall of the high green mound of cane to a seat by his side. When they were in the little woodland below Aunt Elgie's with trees coming close on all sides, Chris stopped the wagon and rolled them each a cigarette. Louisa, after a few lessons, had learned to roll them for herself. Tailor-made ones were not to be had in any store for miles around. But Chris's were smoother than her own, so he often rolled them for her. "It's a pretty day," he said, watching the alternate shadow and shine of a poplar leaf as it drifted through the air. "Yes," she answered, and thought she saw the day with Chris's eyes. He was grateful for each day that left him alive and free. Every day he must look at the hills and leaves and sky and wonder if he were a man given to wondering, and she thought that he was. He had never spoken of so much as a sunset But sometimes of late, when she chanced to come upon him in the barn lot or cornfields, he would be standing motionless, looking into the clouds or at a clump of bright maples or a nest of goldenrod. This world must hold the same things for him that it held for her: beauty and long, sad silences, and the play of rain and light and mist over the hills. It oughtn't to. He ought to be insensitive and stupid and unthinking. It would be easier that way. He had taken another man's life, and because of what he had done, he should have lost all love for his own life. Instead, it seemed to her that he lived with the consciousness of being alive and a love of the life about him more than most men. She looked at the fallen poplar leaves and thought that he might watch them too and feel the same wordless stirring over their beauty that she felt. It mustn't be like that. She looked quickly into his face, and he was not looking at the leaves, but at her. "You look serious, teacher," he said. "I was thinking. I am. Don't you ever get afraid?" He tied the ends of the black leather reins he held into a neat knot. "Sometimes," he answered. "It's not that either," he went on and untied the reins. He tried to smile and succeeded a little. "I'm not afraid. I never was so much. It's something else." "I know," she said. She did not know. She only wanted him to drive on and quit hurting her with his smile. "I don't think you do, teacher. A body like you couldn't." He smiled his crooked half smile. "I've read about city men that lose all their money and know for a little spell what's a-comin', 'fore it comes. I think I feel like one of them men. He thinks more of his things when he knows that he can't have 'em but a little while, and that they don't rightly belong to him." Yes, the man would like his things. She looked at the mule's ears. Funny how one went front and one back at the same time. He did like it then, this life. She quit watching the mules. She couldn't see anything so well for a moment. "Don't give my talk no mind, teacher. My tongue today is looser'n Corey's." She could look at him now. "I'm glad you talked. I'd hate to think that you were afraid. I just hate it that you ruined—" "I know," he answered when she did not finish, "that I done wrong and ruined my life." It was his turn to stare straight before him. "It's something else you couldn't know. If I hadn't 'a done what's been done, it wouldn't 'a been me. There was nothing else." But you could go away from this part of the country, live in a city, and be safe." "I hate cities. I couldn't ever go away unless it be home. There I'd be sure to—" "I took the fiddle home like you said, teacher." She felt foolishly grateful. He wanted so to please her in every little way he could. Was it much trouble to slip it in? Chris smiled. "No, Bloof and Zoley helped a lot. I went one night when Lee Buck stayed home and thought I'd gone to the still. The dogs, they knowed Peter's dogs and kept quiet. While they touched noses and talked about the hunting next fall, I went in and hung up the fiddle. Uncle Peter was a snoring fit to kill." "Have they said anything? I've not heard a word." Chris frowned. "The less talk of that fiddle there is, the better. Hayes was a-tellin' a day or so after the night I slipped it in that Uncle Peter was tellin' him Aunt Elgie had another bad spell." But I thought if the violin would come home, Aunt Elgie might get better," she said, disappointed. "She is better, but Uncle Peter thinks she's worse. He's been telling about how he got up one morning and Aunt Elgie hadn't even started breakfast, was in the back of the house a-nailing down the lid on one of those chests she keeps her new quilts in. She was a-saying the fiddle had come home that night and she was a-hiding it away where it couldn't get out." "She is better then, but I somehow wish that it could hang on the wall again like it used to." "It's better as it is." He watched Bloof sniff lazily at what might have been a mole's trail under the leaves. "The folks in this holler don't make sense." He lowered his voice, and something like a smile softened the hard coldness of his eyes. "Now up in yon end, some man's a-thinkin' he saw and heard a ghost the time you called to him, and in this end, the women, I don't know what they think, are trying to make their own men believe the fiddle was a ghost fiddle, and now when Aunt Elgie comes to her right mind a little, nobody'll believe her." Louisa wondered that he could live and work with his kin here and at the same time remain so aloof from their hatreds and troubles, more so than herself. It was as if his body only were here, with his mind and heart too full of some other trouble to give more than the casual interest of a bystander for that about him. "I'm glad," she said, finding it hard to get words that would say what she wanted to say, "that you don't hate the Barnetts the way the others do. Mabel cried today. Sometimes I get afraid, but I still think that they, if they can, will get men to come for you just to—" "That wouldn't matter. If all the Barnetts got all the deputies in Jellicoe County after me, it would be all the same in the end." She gave up trying to understand. He was not afraid. He would not go away, but he loved his life so much. She was glad when he slapped the mules into motion and drove on. "You worry too much about me and Lee Buck and the Barnetts," he said, when she had sat in silence and watched the mules' feet plod through the drifts of crackling russet leaves. He studied the sky a moment. "Tomorrow'll be another fine day. I'll take you squirrel hunting early in the morning, and it'll help your feelin' a trampin' through the leaves 'fore the sun is hardly up." She wondered if it would, but she agreed gladly enough to go. Dinner was ready when they reached the molasses mill. Teacher was given the seat of honor and a plate of green beans and a sow-belly sandwich made with cornbread and raw onion and flavored with wood smoke and burned grease. Her mood of weary sadness passed as she ate the food and licked her chin and pondered upon the ease with which any so-called civilized person might go primitive. The afternoon was much like the morning, the stripping and hauling and grinding of cane, keeping the mule going round and round, and the cooking. There was a stir-off, and the vat washed, and another batch began. The hound dogs and the pig and the babies grew tired and went to sleep, while the others worked on until the shadows spread across the floor of the valley high to the hill opposite, and it was time to go home. Lee Buck loaded the lard cans of molasses made during the day, his wife, children, and teacher into the wagon, and drove them home. It was late, and there was stock to be fed, and cows to milk, and supper to get, but nobody minded. Rye wanted to sing on the way home, so they sang, "When the Roll is Called Up Yonder." Lee Buck obligingly basted, giving 4 growls of the roll to one of Corey's long, melodious, sad rolls, which she would send up and out into the still evening air until it seemed that the pines on Kinder's Mountain must quiver with the sound. Louisa said she liked the singing, and Lee Buck told her that night he would fiddle for her. When they were home, Rye showed her the fiddle, kept in the back room, hung carefully on 2 nails. It was of dark red cedar wood, whittled and shaped and smoothed by hand. "Pop made it," Rye told her proudly, and Louisa marveled at the man's patience and cunning to do such work with the tools he had. She thought of gates that needed hinges, and leaky outhouses, and steps with missing teeth, and the owner of such things made a fiddle and played it in all probability when there was work to do. Was he a shiftless and a no-good, or was he merely wise and brave, doing the things he wanted to do because the doing of them gave him more pleasure than firm gates and solid steps could give? After supper, Lee Buck fiddled, and his tunes gave her pleasure, just as the cane and earth and sky and leaves pleased her. He was proud when she admired the craft of his hands and talked much of fiddles and their old makers he had known. There was one whom no man he knew had ever seen, but he had made the best fiddles in the whole world. Choir name, Stradivarius. While Lee Buck talked with Teacher, Chris brought wood and built a fire, the first fire of the season, and they all sat about the fireplace and looked into the flames and listened to the music. The children grew drowsy with the heat, and Rye fell asleep with her head on Teacher's knee and a hound dog's head in her lap. Louisa went late to bed. She was pleasantly tired and drowsy, but she must first read the 2 letters Rance Dykes had brought for her on his gray mule. One was from Dr. Stevens, head of the chemistry department at school. She opened it first and glanced quickly through it. Neat pages of neat sentences packed with sensible thoughts. You must remember that you will be eligible for the town scholarship at the end of your next semester. She threw it aside and picked up her aunt's. Talk of club work and the activities of her 2 daughters occupied the first 2 pages. The letter then, no different from all the other of her letters, became a political harangue. How are labor conditions? In Harlan they are dreadful. Miss Lucy McPherson Estes has just spent 2 weeks among the people of the coal mines there and is writing a book about it. She laughed a little to herself in thinking of the labor conditions in Cow Valley. Labor was all right, but fiddling and squirrel hunting were more fun. Then, forgetting the letters, she went to stand at her window and look at the moon. It was a white night with no fog in the valleys, nor stars in the sky. No circle about the moon. Lee Buck had said a while ago that meant that tomorrow would be a fine day, a good day for squirrel hunting. Tomorrow she would not think of the town scholarship. This is one of my favorite chapters in the whole book, and I'll share some of the reasons. But first I want to tell you some of the things that jumped out at me. I really love the description of the sorghum making, of the syrup making. You can tell it's just such a joyous time for all of them. Of course, Louisa's thinking it's fun, but you can tell the kids and the Lee Buck cows and the Hayes cows, all of them, they really enjoy it. Even the hound dogs and the pig, they all are enjoying it. Pap told me so many stories about syrup making or sorghum making when he was a boy. He said it was always a joyous occasion, and families would get together like that. Maybe he said his father, Papa Wade, was really good at making sorghum, so people all over the country here, all over the settlement, as Pap would say, would invite him to come over and help, and then in return they would give him, for his help, give him some jars of sorghum to take home. So Pap said it was just always a joyous time because people got together and they would actually continue to go throughout the night. So people would have to stay up, and some people would take turns stirring while other people slept, and there was always food. So Pap said it was just one of his best memories was sorghum making, and you can kind of see that in this book. I like the one of the words that jumped at me in this one, when she's feeling bad that they've left the school because the stove fell, but now it's warmed up. It's warmed up to the point that the kids are all carrying their brogans over their shoulders instead of on their feet. In those days, there was actually like a type of shoe that was a brogan that you would buy, and kind of it molded to your feet as you wore it. But in my lifetime, Pap always would call his boots like brogans. If Corey and Katie come in and they got him a new pair of boots, he'd want to know where they got their brogans at. So brogans that's still common in my area of Appalachia, but it's more referring today to a pair of boots. And I like the part about the cigarette, about them rolling the cigarette. When I was a little girl, Pap smoked. He quit smoking after he had heart surgery, so in his 40s, I guess. But in the early days, or in all the time that he did smoke, he rolled Prince Albert cigarettes. So I have fond memories of watching him. And like Louisa said, it's a real art if you ever seen anybody do that. So that one reminded me definitely of Pap, of her talking about that she had learned how to roll her own cigarettes. Of course, in these days, when this book was written, cigarettes were looked at totally different than they are today. But why this is my favorite chapter is that there's kind of a theme through it of being happy over those little things. I love this part right here. He had never spoken of so much as a sunset, but sometimes of late, when she chanced to come upon him in the barn, lot, or cornfields, he would be standing motionless, looking into the clouds, or at a clump of bright maples, or a nest of goldenrod. The world must hold the same things for him that it held for her: beauty, and long silences, sad silences, and the play of rain and light and mist over the hills. Just that it's just, if we take but a minute to look around us, no matter where you're at, there's always beauty to see. But in our hurried modern day lives, we don't always do that. But, sometimes, even as adults, we need to take a minute, even if it's just a very few minutes, to stand and stare at the leaves, to watch the dust motes in the air, to whatever. There's just beauty in everything around us. I really love that. And then I really love this part. Louisa said she liked the singing, and Lee Buck told her that that night he would fiddle for her. When they were home, Rice showed her the fiddle, kept in the back room, hung over 2 nails. It was of dark red cedar wood, whittled and shaped and smoothed by hand. Pop made it, Rice told her proudly, and Louisa marveled at the man's patience and cunning to do such work with the tools he had. When she thought of gates that needed hinges, and leaky outhouses, and steps with missing teeth, and the owner of such things made a fiddle and played it, in all probability, when there was work to do, was he a shiftless and a no-good, or was he merely wise and brave, doing the things he wanted to do, because the doing of them gave him more pleasure than firm gates and solid steps could give? I love that part. Of course, there's things, responsibilities in life that I believe we definitely should be doing. I think of responsibility as like a guiding force in my life, so I respect that. But I also love that, sometimes we worry too much about those things that need doing instead of the things that we enjoy. I love that little tidbit. I know it's a balance, but I really like that peek into that Louisa's kind of seeing. Well, Lee Buck should be working on the gates and the broken steps and the leaky outhouse, but instead he chose to make a beautiful fiddle and play it. Is he shiftless or is he brilliant? She's really studying that, so I really love that part. I really try to live my life to notice the little things in life, and that brings me great joy and great gratitude almost always. I think gratitude and joy go together. So I really love those parts. I also love the image of them singing in the wagon as they're going. So I'll put a link below to the song, When the Roll is Called Up Yonder, if you've never heard it. It's one that I grew up singing, so I'm very familiar with it. And the part where she said that when the Lee Buck obligingly basted, what she means is he was singing the bass part, so he basted. That must have been what the Lee Bucks called it. They must have called it he was basting the song, but it just means that he sung the bass part while they were singing their parts. So I really, wouldn't you have loved to have seen that, the wagon going down the road with them all singing? That would have been a wonderful sight. So I hope that you enjoyed this chapter, and I hope you'll leave a comment and tell me what things jumped out at you. And as always, I hope you'll continue to drop back by so we can see what happens next in Mountain Path.